Hello, Read Through the Word friends. Today is July 5th. So I hope you had a fantastic holiday on July 4th. I hope that you were able to do something you enjoyed with the people you enjoy. And I hope you are just having a great day today as we enter midweek and we just continue to move right along halfway through our year. That's crazy, right? You made it halfway through the year-long chronological Bible study. So good job. And two, remember every day is not perfect. We miss days. We, just jump right back in. Learn what God has for you in the moment. And summer can get kind of crazy too. Just have lots of grace for yourself and pop on when you can. And just remember that there's grace for you as you're learning today. Grace for all of us as we learn, right? So thankful for that. So I'm so glad that you are here. So glad you're here with me today. Today, we're going to talk about Psalm 49. And I'm going to start out with some historical info. So just two things that kind of give some interesting background to our lesson today. In Psalm 49, in verses 14 and 15, the psalmist is talking about the grave, right? That, when we go to the grave, like, that's it. This stuff that we have isn't going to come with us, But I want to talk about that word. Now, in some translations, they did translate it to grave. The Hebrew word is Sheol, and a lot of times Bibles will just translate it. They'll just say Sheol because there isn't a specific translation for it. It's a Hebrew word in which there isn't really a known origin for it, and there aren't really any parallels in any other language. It definitely was thought to be some place beneath the earth, where the dead went, like the afterlife. Similar thoughts and ideas existed in ancient Greek thought, like the idea of Hades, things like that. Some similar ideas about it. We do know that in ancient times, there were a lot of different thoughts about the afterlife. None of them were really developed into like a solid theology. So remember, the writers of the Old Testament, they were not writing from this place of, we have figured it all out, right? They were still learning about who God was and who he was in relation to them in their covenant. They were still learning a lot of things. So when we read about, different verses that these ancient writers wrote, we need to remember they didn't have, some solid understanding all the time of things like the afterlife. So just an interesting thing historically. The second thing that I thought was really interesting, that this psalm is attributed to the sons of Korah. Does anybody recognize the name Korah? Okay, so we know that these were, Levites that were, in charge of different worship things. I'm going to read from gotquestions.org, and I will link this. I will link this information in the notes. And remember, Korah is the one who rebelled, right, against Moses and ended up meeting his demise. And it was really a tragic story. So in gotquestions.org, it says there are two postscripts to Korah's tragic story. In the New Testament, the fate of Korah is used as a warning to false teachers who harass the church. Woe to them, they have been destroyed in Korah's rebellion. That's from Jude 1:11. On a happier note, the descendants of Korah found favor in God's eyes. 7 generations after Korah died, the prophet Samuel arose from the line of Korah. The Korahites later became doorkeepers and custodians for the tabernacle. One group of Korahites joined King David in various military exploits and won the reputation of being expert warriors. And during the time of King David, the sons of Korah became the leaders in choral and orchestral music in the tabernacle. Among the biblical psalms, 11 are attributed to the sons of Korah, and Psalm 49 is one of them. So, I thought that was pretty amazing. What does it say? Seven generations after Korah died, the prophet of Samuel arose. And then eventually his descendants would continue to help with the tabernacle. And then one of these sons of Korah, or more than one, writes this psalm decrying the evil of wealth and the corruption of wealth. And I was so encouraged by this psalm because I thought, wow, looking back at their lineage, not great, right? Korah's legacy was not great. But so now years later, as they're writing this psalm and as they're writing these things, I'm thinking, someone got it right. Someone's listening. The name of our lesson today, someone is listening. Also, we have been talking about the judgment that's coming for the northern kingdom right now, for Samaria, and we've talked about this in our lessons, right? The corruption of the people in Samaria and in the northern kingdom of Israel, very much like their wealth, their indulgence, flaunting their wealth, their wealth at the expense of the poor, and just, glorifying themselves, indulging in themselves, following idols. All these things are happening in the northern kingdom. So you just think about the writers of this psalm, where are they coming from? Do I know for sure? No. But we think of, they knew their history. They knew Korah's sin. They knew of the sin of the northern kingdom and the wealth that was becoming, just the corruption of their wealth and the injustice that was happening. And then you read this psalm that they write and you think, somebody's listening. For example, Psalm 45 verses 5 through 10, says, "Why should I fear when trouble comes, when enemies surround me? They trust in their wealth and boast of great riches, yet they cannot redeem themselves from death by paying a ransom to God. Redemption does not come so easily, for no one can ever pay enough to live forever and never see the grave. Those who are wise must finally die, just like the foolish and senseless, leaving all their wealth behind." Someone's listening, right? The person or writers that wrote this were listening when God was trying to get his people's attention to say, I am your glory, I am your wealth, I am your true riches. And someone here is listening, and it was just so refreshing in response to the evil that we know was going on during that time, some of the wickedness, to know that this writer, they saw the truth that God was trying to speak to them. And sometimes we wonder too, who's listening? Definitely as the northern kingdom, gets exiled by Assyria, and the southern kingdom's not there yet. We have hopes in Hezekiah, but we also know that eventually Judah's going to end up in exile too. And when you read these judgments on these nations being exiled, you just have to wonder, was anybody listening? Surely there must have been a small population of people that still followed God, that still heard his word, that still were loving him and loving others, that were still making the attempt to live as God called them to live. They're not really talked about a lot, though, are they? When we read all of the major and the minor prophets and Kings and Chronicles, we don't hear a lot about the people that were faithful in the middle of all of the wickedness. But we can turn to a psalm like Psalm 49 and say, someone was listening. Someone cared. In the midst of darkness and grief and despair, there was this hope that someone heard God and someone knew the truth that God was their true wealth, that God was their true justice, that all hope would be found in the Lord. And I think of that today too. Sometimes we feel like, we see pain around us, we see difficulty, we see distortion, we see division, and we think, is anybody listening? And I think we can be confident to say, not only is God listening, we know God's always listening, right? To our cries, to our prayers. But we can be confident somebody else is listening too. Somebody else is listening to the call of God to lead God's people to justice and righteousness and healing for the church. And to pray, God, bring those people. The people that are hearing you, God, the people that are listening, connect me with them so that we, as God's people, can continue to spread the light of God, the hope of God to people who are in such darkness. So someone's listening, friend. And I hope we're all listening. I hope we're all ready to respond to the needs of a world that just so desperately needs the light, the joy, the justice, the presence of God that so many around us are in need of. You have a great day, friends. We'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.